Welcome to our discussion tonight, Weight Management, Nutrition Perspectives. My name is Megan Ellison. I'm a registered dietitian nutritionist and a certified diabetes care and education specialist. Thanks for being here. It's a nice day out. I just took a walk, so hopefully you got out and enjoyed some of the sunshine. If not, get out there after our talk tonight. Thank you to Stilly Valley Health Connections for sponsoring tonight's session. You registered through Stilly Valley, and they will send you a recording of this video and also the slides. I will share the slides after the presentation tonight, so you'll have those to refer back to. Let me just check on the chat. Looks like the webinar chat is working. So you can use the chat or the Q&A to put questions in. And we have a lot of slides to get through. So we're going to jump right in. People can join. And again, you can watch the video afterwards if you need to refresh your memory on some of these things, or just watch it again because it's a lot of information and we're going to speed through some of it. I do have a couple times where I'm just going to pause for a second and actually have you think about how this applies to your own life. So if you have a little pen and paper, that would be really handy, like really helpful for you to grab something that you can write on to really jot down some notes that are going to be specific to you and think about how you're going to apply some of these things to your own life. Okay, let's get started. This is a big topic. But we're basically going to cover some statistics and correlation with disease, figuring out how to get off the merry-go-round, what that means, behaviors at work and common pitfalls to avoid, nutrition, medication interactions. We've got some medications out that are pretty popular these days, so I'll give you my 2 cents on them, and some practical strategies for management of nutrition medication interactions, as well as just practical strategies for everyday life. And then set some specific goals with an action plan. Okay, so we know that there's an issue. When I was training to become a dietitian, we didn't even have this map. This map did not, this is from the CDC. It is the risk factor survey, and it is a self-reported survey of people, stating their height and their weight. And over time, this map has gotten darker and darker because our rates of overweight and obesity, this one is particular for obesity, have gone up. And we didn't even have these rates of 40%, 45%, 50%. They actually had to change the map and add some categories and add some different colors because our rates of obesity have just been skyrocketing. So this is new territory. It is an epidemic that we're having. 1 in 5 people have obesity. And we know that if we look at everybody, like including overweight and obesity, it's basically about 70% of our adult population. So it's a major issue. And the reason it's an issue is not because of weight. We're not talking about like fat shaming or that it's a problem with just being in a bigger body. That's not what, the issue is. The issue is health. And so we do see a direct correlation with cardiovascular disease. I see this direct correlation with obesity and extra fat mass specifically. So we know that heart disease is the #1 killer in the United States as well as globally, and that rates of obesity are rising right along with our rates of overweight and obesity. So, it is a health issue. It is a health crisis. And we do have strong evidence that weight management strategies do impact things like high blood pressure, hyperlipidemia, hyperglycemia, so high blood sugar, and that even small amounts of sustained weight loss, this is from the guidelines, guidelines for weight management, even small amounts of sustained weight loss of like 3%, that is not very much weight. That's like 6 pounds for if I was 200 pounds in my 5'4" stature. And so I was in that obese category. That would be 6 pounds, would be 3%. That is, very manageable amounts of weight loss. So small amounts can have clinically significant health benefits. So if you are dealing with, obesity or overweight, typically we also see these other things going along with it. High triglycerides, high blood glucose, high A1C, which is your average glucose, diabetes, high cholesterol, blood pressure. And those are the things that we're really trying to, get at when we talk about weight management, because it is a health issue. And then we had kind of a pandemic within an epidemic, or a pandemic within a pandemic. And we did see that, especially with COVID, this kind of brought out to the forefront that it's not just about weight, it's the type of weight. And we saw, increased ICU admissions, increased rates of death, need of mechanical ventilators, higher in the population of people who had more of that visceral adiposity, or basically more fat. So again, it's not about weight. It's like, what kind of mass are we talking about? It's that extra fat mass that is really associated with disease and poor outcomes when you have another disease on top of a metabolic disorder. So the type and distribution of weight matters. So the question is, because we know it's a problem, and we know that it really is affecting our quality of life, our longevity at this point. And so if you are in this talk, and maybe it's for yourself, maybe it's for somebody else that you love, but the why really matters. Like the why to make change really is, you kind of got to get at that to keep that motivator in front of you, because it's hard to make changes. And we're going to talk about some specifics and maybe some ways to make that easier. But I would really pause for just a second and like maybe write down on your piece of paper, if you've got it, write down your why. So, it might be, I want to get healthy. Well, why is that? And we say in kind of like the counseling world, why till you cry? Like, ask why until you really get to the heart of, the heart of it. Like, why does it truly matter to you? So if anybody wants to put their why in the chat or in the Q&A, feel free to do that. But think about, what are you wanting to be healthier for? What are you wanting to live longer for? What are those things that really matter to you? And it's going to be different for everybody. Okay. So if you know the why, then the next question is the what, right? Like, what are we supposed to do? There's so many options out there that we can be very overwhelmed. And it is, we're just inundated with so much information. Some of it seems contradictory. A lot of it is, kind of sensational, right? That's how they get you, is like the sensational, big promises, quick fix, that kind of stuff. Talk about that. But all diets have pros and cons. And you've probably heard of like, someone doing really well on keto, for example. So what's the pro of keto? Well, reduced sugar, less processed food. It actually, in nutrition, we've used it for over 100 years for controlling uncontrollable epilepsy. So it's a diet we know well. But the cons are, like, we also know, because we have been prescribing this for 100 years, we know it's not nutrient, robust. It's not a well-balanced intake, right? We also know that it's not seen to really have greater loss than other plans in the long run. And there's a high attrition, or basically a high dropout rate, due to unsustainability. We also see a lot of issues like gallstones, diarrhea, gut microbiome concerns long term, because you're basically just feeding a lot of fat without the carbs and fiber. What about some of these others like 30-10, Weight Watchers, Noom? There's some really good support with those plans. There's structured plans provided. There's apps. There's check-ins, recipes. Some of them actually provide food and provide meals, which for some people, the convenience factor is a big deal. But do be careful about like the unrealistic claims and expectations, that diet mentality. And some of these actually have pretty harmful food messaging. They've, been working on making that better over time. But, if you have any history of eating disorder or already have kind of a negative relationship with food or body, sometimes the tracking or sometimes being so hyper focused on weighing and tracking can be actually pretty negative to your mental health, which is health, right? So yeah, be careful with some of these plans, especially if you already have those tendencies. Paleo and Whole30. I love the emphasis on whole foods and plants, the reduction in sugar, the reduction in processed items. But again, they're like cutting out whole food groups, so they're really not nutritionally balanced for the long term. And again, some of those have some pretty weird, strict, harmful messaging around what you should and should not eat. Which, how do they know? How do they know for you, right? Intermittent fasting. So that's a really hot one right now, hot topic. There's a bunch of different types of fasting plans out there. And we do know from like looking at observational studies and epidemiological studies that people groups historically who have fasting as part of like their religious practices, for example, do have better weight control over the long term. So, you're thinking about like religious holidays or like Ramadan, which is 1 month a year, and, these short periods of time. We don't have really good long-term studies on what this does to metabolic processes. And we don't see any greater weight loss than simply calorie reduction overall. So that's partly how this works, is this, you're restricting calorie intake by restricting your time. There is a higher attrition rate or dropout rate due to unsustainability. And we're seeing now that people have been on some of these for longer, that muscle and bone losses are pretty significant. And this is even more so in women in postmenopausal, perimenopausal and postmenopausal women are having even more muscle and bone losses. So, a lot of this intermittent fasting research was done in young males with lots of muscles and testosterone. And that does not necessarily apply to middle-aged females, right? Middle-aged and older. And metabolic adaptation can be happening. And I actually see intermittent fasting, when people have done it for long periods of time, I do see that in my own patient population as being associated with diabetes. So about 3/4 of my people who come in with newly diagnosed diabetes have been doing intermittent fasting. These are the people who skip breakfast, sometimes even skip lunch, and then all those calories are in the afternoon and evening. And a lot of times, they're making up for the day, not eating earlier in the day. And that actually plays into the pathophysiology, or like the underlying things going wrong with blood sugar control. Because when you go fasting for a really long period of time, you end up making sugar anyway. And the way that we do it is by losing muscle. So you want to be really careful about something that you're doing as a short-term thing that turns into a long-term thing that was never meant to be that. So I mean, all this to say, like, there's pros and cons to all of these different plans. And here's the punchline: we don't have a holy grail of a diet. Like, it doesn't exist at this point. We do know that, some plans work better for some people and other plans work better for other people. Like, some people really love high plant intake, so it'd be high carbohydrate intake, like maybe they're vegetarian. Some people really gravitate towards high protein intake. But we don't have a holy grail as far as like macronutrients of what's going to work best for everybody. And this goes back to like, genetic differences, tradition differences, like what did you grow up with, preferences, all of those things. So yeah, so that's actually the punchline. I'm putting it early in the talk so that you can like just already know like you are not the same as your friend or the person who, you've heard lost a bunch of weight doing X or Y. You've got to figure out for you what is going to work. And there's so many factors that are influencing weight management. We know now it is not calories in, calories out. That is a small piece of a very, very big puzzle that includes genetics. It includes hormones. It includes, like how are you even like metabolizing this food? It includes your gut microbiome. We're seeing associations with particular gut bugs and better weight control. Um, of course, age, I already mentioned, especially women in that period of postmenopausal era, we know that our metabolism has changed, even if our food intake has not, right? Things are different. So it's not just calories in, calories out. Even though that is a piece of the puzzle, it's not the whole picture. Okay, so we're going to focus on what you can control on some specific behaviors. And this is my little weight management wheel. I will give you this handout. This handout will be sent with some of the things. This isn't everything, but it's some of the factors to be thinking about with weight management. And then hopefully over the course of this talk, you're going to identify some strengths that you have already going for you and how you can use them in your own journey with weight management. Okay, so here are some successful weight loss strategies. And this is from like research where people had lost 5 to 10% of total body weight. So even more than that 3 to 5% where we have benefit. Definitely eating less food, exercising. In this particular study, they were eating less fat intake. 41% of people had switched to foods with fewer calories. What was not seen as associated with successful weight loss this is from the NHANES data. So this is like people reporting their own successes, right? Like what they're doing in the real world. This isn't a clinical trial. This is like real world living. What are people doing versus what was not working? Popular diets, liquid diets, although we do have a little bit of research on some high protein shakes can be beneficial in some clinical trials that have been done. Non-prescription weight loss pills. So careful about all those things online that are telling you that they are the magic thing. Diet foods, diet products. So I call it kind of the merry-go-round when we are thinking that there's like the next pill or the next diet or the next guru is going to have all the answers. I call it the merry-go-round because it's a different horse, right? Like you think, oh, maybe that horse over there is going to be the answer, or maybe this horse over here is going to be the answer. So you're like jumping from horse to horse, but you're actually like on the same merry-go-round and you're really not going anywhere different. So be careful of that. Like if you feel like you've just been jumping from thing to thing to thing, maybe it's time to get off the merry-go-round. We'll talk about what that can look like. Here's some more research to support this. So these are the Obesity Task Force guidelines that the Obesity Society, the American Heart Association, and the American Cardiology Association put together. And basically they looked at all the literature and said like, let's look at what works. And pretty much any dietary plan worked as long as it had some energy deficit to it. So the calories were reduced from what people were burning. But also they found that it wasn't just dietary intake that mattered. There was diet, but also the exercise piece of things was a big piece of the puzzle, and the behavioral side of things. So working through, barriers in your life, things like depression. If depression is getting in the way of making long-term changes or even starting with changes, that needs to be addressed, maybe even first, right? So it's really like a three-pronged stool where you need all three legs of that stool to have a solid foundation to really lose the weight and keep it off long term. And then the other thing that they found was that the intensity or the frequency of check-in, either with a professional or with a group, was really helpful in success long term. And that frequency was basically like 22 to 26 visits a year. It's basically like every other week, checking in on behavior changes and getting the support needed. So it's like twice a month. It's pretty frequent. Um, so if you haven't seen your dietitian lately, maybe it's time for a check-in. These are the practical or practice guidelines for obesity. And really the first plan is the foundational part of obesity management is supposed to be lifestyle therapy. So that should include all of these components I just mentioned: meal planning, physical activity, behavioral modification. Some of the specific meal plans recommended include things like Mediterranean, DASH, low carb, low fat, volumetric, high protein, vegetarian. So you can see there's a lot of things that have been shown to work. Some meal replacements, like for example, for those non-breakfast people, like a protein shake, for example, in the morning. What else? We'll talk more about exercise in a little bit. Behavior wise, here's some other things like, having someone to check in on you with like goal setting, monitoring, behavioral contracting, working on stress reduction. So that might be with like a counselor or therapist. Cognitive restructuring, same thing, that might be with like a therapist. Yeah, so if you feel like, that piece is missing, maybe that is the missing piece. If you've tried a bunch of different, exercise and diet plans, like maybe it's the behavior piece that's missing. Okay, here are some more successful behaviors from people who I call like successful losers, people who have lost significant weight in the real world and kept it off for a significant amount of time. This is from the National Weight Control Registry data. And at this point, they have so many people who have been with them tracking behaviors for such a long period of time that it's over 5 years. They've lost the weight and kept it off for over 5 years, and it's been over 70 pounds weight loss. So that's, very significant. So again, not a clinical trial. This is like people just living their lives. What are they doing? They're eating fewer calories. They're eating breakfast every day, which I know for some of you is just, rankles you. That breakfast is on there because some people are just not breakfast people. And if you're not a breakfast person, that's okay, but let's break your fast with something. Doesn't have to be breakfast food, doesn't have to be a big meal. Maybe it's even just like a snack, like fruit and nuts, but something to get your metabolism going in the day when you need it, like while you are awake. So the other thing is like, there's not a special time of day. It's really like, what is your schedule, and breaking your fast when you wake, whatever that means for you, whether you're swing shift or night shift or day shift. And then eating during your waking hours and having a true fast, meaning like 12-hour fast, maybe a little bit more, not too much from a muscle and bone loss sense. But a true fast like overnight and while you're sleeping. So yeah, if you are not a breakfast person, you might need to get some help with that. Maintain a consistent eating pattern. monitoring weight, keeping food journals. Again, if you have any tendency towards obsessive compulsive tendencies or eating disorder, those things would not be recommended. Watching less TV, so basically less sitting. And then on average, these people are exercising about an hour a day, and it's not anything fancy. The thing that most of them are doing is just walking. So, for that hour a day. So it's not, not rocket science. It's not anything fancy, even like you don't even need necessarily a gym membership. Okay, so that's from the National Weight Control Registry information. And then we also do have really good research now, especially post-pandemic, but even back, this was from 2010. Even back in 2010, we had research showing that online interventions were working. So you didn't even have to really like meet in person necessarily. But having some sort of accountability for monitoring, some sort of communication, social support, some sort of a structure to the program. And then individually tailored program where you're working with a dietitian, or you're working with your counselor, or you're working with your trainer, or ideally all three, right, to have a very individualized program. And basically, with that, you're closing that feedback loop. So you're having the accountability, you're seeing what's working, what's not working, you're able to make changes, you have maybe that kind of support when it's not going well, right? So that feedback loop and like having that interaction can be really important to this journey. So if you're trying to do this on your own, maybe consider getting some support. Okay, I want to talk about a few pitfalls that I see regularly in my practice. Number one, seeking a quick fix. And this is partly just like our culture, right? Like you are probably inundated with social media and like advertisements saying, you can lose 30 pounds in 30 days. So, this really quick fix that kind of sets you up for having unrealistic expectations. But the problem with that is then when it's not working, we tend to like throw in the towel with it. And also when you have that unrealistic expectation thing, a lot of times like the diet, quote unquote, restrictive diet is so restrictive that it's really unsustainable. Like the way that it is developed or what it's asking you to do is so unsustainable that you really only can do it for a short period of time. And unfortunately, a lot of people then feel like when they quote unquote fail, they feel like they've failed when actually it was like the diet failed, right? The diet was setting them up to have that failure in the first place. So if anything sounds too good to be true, and it's like, quick fix mentality, probably run the other direction, because healthful weight loss should take time. Weight gain doesn't happen overnight. Weight loss should not happen overnight either. And here are the recommendations from the National Institutes of Health. So anywhere from like 5 to 10% of total body weight within a 3 to 6 month period. And the recommendations for people in the overweight category, so a BMI of 25 to 30, is a half a pound a week, up to a pound a week. So just like think about where are you at with your big picture goals. But then, if you're only doing half a pound to a pound a week, how long is that going to take? It should take some time. For people in that BMI category over 30, 1 to 2 pounds a week, because they have more mass to lose, right? You've got more wiggle room there. So again, here's that example of like 200 pounds at 5%, that's 10 pounds in a 3 to 6 month period. Or if we even go up to like 7% of body weight, that's like 14 pounds in a 3 to 6 month period. So I think just shifting your expectations of like what is healthful, like what is a healthful and realistic rate of weight loss, we need to set you up psychologically to be in the place of like, okay, this is going to take time, and it really should take time so that you're losing less muscle and bone density. Because when people lose it too fast, they regain it and usually then some. So a lot of times I see people just like, on the chronic yo-yo diet thing and gaining weight in the long run. And then we got to factor in plateaus. So the other thing that the NIH says is like, okay, if you've just been losing for like 3 months in a row and you haven't had any plateaus, ideally you would have a little plateau. So you're basically like doing this in like stair steps where your body's resetting at that lower number, lower number, lower number. And ideally you're working on that muscle mass along the way, which I'm going to keep harping on because the muscle is such a big deal. Okay. So the other thing with this is, think beyond the scale, because sometimes my patients will come in and they're like, oh, I'm working so hard. I'm going to the gym and the scale is staying the same. And they've made all these changes with like gaining muscle and like being more metabolically active, and they've changed their blood sugar control and their blood pressure, and there's other things like metabolically we can see that they've made progress, but maybe the scale is staying the same because they're having that muscle gain and fat loss, right? So don't just look at the number on the scale, or maybe chuck the scale, right? Like maybe just get it out of your life if that is too like distracting or discouraging, and track something else. Track maybe waist circumference. That's actually a better predictor of health anyway. Maybe you're tracking energy or your sleep quality or improvements in dietary intake. So maybe you're tracking the number of cups of vegetables you're getting in a day, if that's a goal. You could be tracking things along with your exercise, like strength or flexibility or cardiovascular fitness. So there's so many other metrics that are going to hopefully be more reaffirming to you and not as discouraging as the scale, because the scale jumps around based on water weight and salt intake and all kinds of stuff, muscle density, bone density. And so sometimes if you're just looking at that one number, that can be pretty discouraging. Okay, so think about something else. Let me just look to check the chat. Let's actually do the Q&A. I want to have less back pain and be able to hike and kayak again. I love that goal. So it's less pain. So sometimes weight management or like weight loss is associated with less pain. And then even just like probably mobility for you, right? Like hiking, kayaking, not just weight related, but just like mobility related, getting in and out, that kind of stuff. And then I think, that sounds to me like you love the outdoors and you want to be outside more and you want to be more active in your body, like all of those things that are so life-giving, good for like your body and your soul, right? I love that goal. That's great. Thank you for sharing. Okay, and then another person says, I want to eat healthier in my senior age. Yeah, for quality of life. Yep. And then walking the dog. Yeah. The dog will love that too. That's great. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about, well, before we move on, just really quickly, for you, jot this down. What is your goal? And if you were to calculate your rate of weight loss, like depending on where you're at with your BMI, which you can look up online if you don't already know it, what is the rate that's recommended for you per week from the NIH, just to like reset or reframe what is realistic weight loss for you? Okay, because then you can figure out like how long does it really take. Okay, let's talk quickly about medications. So we've got 3 main categories of medication that have been FDA approved for weight management. One is lipase inhibitors, which basically block absorption of fats in the GI tract. The problem with this that I find is, my patients are coming in with just crazy diarrhea because it's fat malabsorption, right? And a lot of people actually already have fat malabsorption diarrhea to begin with, especially over the age of 40. And so, that is a quality of life thing. It also can induce things that go along with diarrhea, dehydration, electrolyte imbalances, and then specifically fat soluble vitamin malabsorption because you're not absorbing the fat. And so if you're not absorbing the fat, you're also not absorbing those fat soluble vitamins as well, like vitamin D, which we already have a hard time getting enough of in the Northwest to begin with. So from a nutrition perspective, like these can be pretty tough. Um, Appetite and craving suppressants. So we have a few of those on the market. Some of them have a risk of increased blood pressure. And for a lot of my patients, like they're just not even an option because they already have high blood pressure. So do be careful with that. And then GI distress. So nausea, vomiting, constipation, diarrhea. And then the other thing is like sometimes my patients are put on this. I'm not a prescribing provider, but they're put on it from another provider. And unfortunately, sometimes the discussion isn't had before, putting the people on these medications that they're actually not already eating. That like they're already going all day without eating. So they really don't need an appetite suppressant during the day. They already don't get normal appetite cues. So we actually kind of need to work on increasing the like normal cueing and sensations and understanding what's happening there to support people in eating when they need it, like eating to fuel their day versus when they don't need it, which is often like in that relaxing period at night. So a lot of these actually just make that whole scenario worse. So, if you're already in that category, if you're going long periods without eating, these might not be the best option for you. And then, of course, the new hotness is GLP-1s and GIPs or glucagon-like peptides, peptide-1 receptor agonists, and what is GIP? Gastric inhibitory polypeptides. So I say they're new hotness because everybody thinks that they're new. Like you see the ads and your neighbors on them and your sisters on them and they're everywhere. But I will tell you, they're actually not new. So the one here, like exenatide, was FDA approved back in 2005. It's been around 20 years. I started in diabetes education 15 years ago. And at that time, I was wondering, like, why is not everybody on a GLP-1? Because they work so well. That's amazing. But back then, the docs were really hesitant about prescribing injectables, anything that had like a needle associated with it. But now like, everybody and their dog is on it. So what I see in practice is a lot of GI distress. So just be aware. If you already have constipation or if you already have diarrhea, sometimes these medications can make it worse. And basically both GLPs and GIPs they're incretin mimetics in the sense that they're mimicking our natural incretin hormones that should be made in the gut by us and our gut bugs. But we know that they're low in people who have overweight or obesity and people who have diabetes. These incretin mimetics or incretin hormones are low. And so incretin hormone basically helps to release insulin from the pancreas for regulating blood sugar control. And so the pharmaceutical companies came in and said, well, maybe we can provide this exogenously where people can just give themselves these hormones that are missing. And lo and behold, it does work. But I will also tell you that you can do this. You can increase your own incretin hormones with what you're feeding your body, with what you're feeding your microbiome. You can do this with lots of fruits and vegetables and fiber and color, like polyphenols in your life, in your dietary intake. So you can make this better. But I also want to say, like, it's a tool, right? Like I am neutral. Like if it's a tool in the toolbox where that is the tool that's really going to help you, or really going to help your sister or your friend or your neighbor, please do not discourage someone from getting a tool that could be really helpful to them, because I've seen this. I mean, it is the closest thing that we have to like a magic pill, right? In the diet world. And I've seen it help with not just weight and blood sugar, because originally these were approved for diabetes, right? But I've also seen it be really helpful for other things. We know now that it affects things like sleep apnea positively, um, other addictive like behaviors, other cravings. So please don't be negative on anybody who is using these as a tool in their health journey, because it might be the thing that they're missing biologically, right? Okay, but be careful of the GI distress. So I see a lot of constipation. So, a lot of times I'm working with my patients towards like higher fiber, higher fluids, movement to keep that GI tract going. A few people with diarrhea, but the predominance is more towards slowing of motility and constipation. And then muscle loss. I see quite a bit of muscle loss if people, and that equates also to bone loss. If you're losing muscle, you're losing bone. And that is for people who are losing rapid weight, right? So it's above that 2 pounds per week where we really see that increased muscle and bone loss. So we want to be careful about the rate of weight loss and making sure you're having plenty of protein and using your muscles to try and prevent that muscle loss. And then sometimes I'm even seeing dehydration because people are just not getting the hunger and thirst cues. So those are some things to be careful and watch out for. Okay. No comments on medications, looks like. So, okay, let's move on. Let's get to some practical strategies. Okay, here's another pitfall, all or nothing mentality, something to avoid. So that perfectionism thing where it's like, okay, I'm either on my diet or I'm off my diet. And the problem with that then is like, there's no room for a mistake, or there's no room for like maybe a celebratory meal out, or, whatever it is, because you feel like you have to be perfect. I see this a lot with exercise, and we're going to talk about exercise next, where it's either like, okay, I go for an hour or I do nothing, right? When the reality is that the small successes add up, and it's really those little things in your life that add up over time to big rewards. It's just like compounding interest. Like you can't imagine how it's going to add up over time, but it does, right? So with the exercise side of things, let's break it down. The biggest thing and the number one thing from the physical activity guidelines for Americans is avoid inactivity. So that's not even like, exercise. That's just your activities of daily living. Avoid just sitting around all day, which most of us these days are sitting a lot more than we used to. So if you are still working, make sure you take your breaks. Make sure you take your lunch. Move your body. If you can do 3 per 30, so that's a good hack, like 3 minutes of moving per every 30 minutes of sitting. We have some research showing that really helps with the hormonal shifts that happen when you're just sitting all day. Even if you can just stand, that changes things. So if you can get a sit to stand desk, that is better. And then you can kind of, adjust that as needed throughout the day. Build in more movement to everyday activities. So this is like the parking further away, taking the stairs, especially the stairs to the gym instead of the escalator when you can. Of course, some people are going to the gym with, plantar fasciitis or with a disability of some sort. So, maybe we'll give these people the benefit of the doubt. Maybe they really can't walk well and they're going to do their arms or their core or something. But the point is, like, wherever you can fit in the little bits, that does start adding up over time. And then from an actual like exercise recommendation, where you're getting your heart rate up, that is 150 minutes a week, moderate intensity. So that means you can still have a conversation, but you're not singing a song. You can talk, but you can't sing. So that's moderate intensity. At least 3 days a week would be great. So you're, kind of spacing that out over the week from a metabolic sense and also from a blood sugar control sense. And then in 10-minute bouts or more. But I will say, we actually have research, especially looking at glucose control, that even 2 minutes of movement, especially like after a meal, will help with blood sugar control. So every bit of it counts. But from like a cardiovascular sense, like ideally it would be, in 10-minute bouts or more. And you can break this up. It could be 20 minutes a day for 7 days a week, 30 minutes a day for 5 days a week, or maybe you do those classes. Like maybe you're a class person and you just want to go to a gym or go to a studio for an hour or for 50 minutes and chunk it up. If that's what you need, go for it. But that, 150 minutes is what we're aiming for ideally. So if you're, not anywhere near that, just start with something and working towards that 150 or more. And then we want to make sure we do not forget about the muscles. The muscle mass is the most important for both blood sugar and weight control because it's the most metabolically active tissue. And it's even more important for those of you who are maybe already on this weight loss journey where you've lost some weight already. The muscle mass, like the amount of muscle you have for maintaining that weight loss, is huge because it keeps your metabolism ramped so that you can actually like still eat food, right? Like you can still have enough calories and enough nutrition coming in to meet micronutrient needs and to have some quality of life with your food intake, but keep your metabolism ramped enough where you're able to maintain that weight loss. It's also really important for fall prevention later in life. So when you think muscles, think automatically bones, because anytime you're putting strain on your muscles, then your muscles and your ligaments are putting strain on your bones. So anytime you're doing strength exercises or resistance exercises, you are helping your bones as well. And the recommendation is at least 2 times a week of some sort of strength or resistance exercise, more times per week if you want more benefits. So 2 minimum, but if you want to go for 3, great. And it doesn't have to be fancy. Again, it doesn't have to be a machine. It doesn't have to be weights. It can be your own body weight. It can be squats. It can be wall push-ups. It can be plank, lunges, whatever works for you with your current situation in life. Okay, so let's check in. What are some specific ways that you can activate your lifestyle? Just like ways you can take things that you're already doing and just bump it up a little bit. And also, have you found something that brings you joy movement wise? Like if you are trying to do something that is complete drudgery, I will tell you, you're not going to stick with it, right? So you've got to figure out something that you love to do that includes movement. I just started dancing again. I love dancing. I've been away from it for like 25, almost 30 years, and I'm dancing again. So it's been a lot of fun. And then also, what are you doing for your muscles? Like, do you have any specific resistance exercises in your life or strength-based exercises in your life? Okay, so Eleanor says, I'm retired and recently having back problems. Still walking, though. Not as much as you were in the past. That's okay, but you're still doing it. And then the swimming for seniors. I love that. The swimming for seniors is great because, you have the buoyancy of the water, so less impact on joints, but still the resistance of the water itself. And it's warm usually, and you're in a class, so you get told what to do, and it's social. Yeah, all of that is great. Chair yoga. Chair yoga is another really good one. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Okay. Right. If you guys want to put anything else in the chat, I'll come back to that. Okay, so write down what you're doing, how you can activate things. What are you doing that you love movement wise, and maybe an idea or two for muscles. Okay, here's some more tips on just setting up your environment. So thinking about like working smarter than harder with all of this. Um, our plate size has gotten bigger over time. So think about like, do you have a 9-inch plate or do you have a 10 or 12 or, 13-inch plate? Because that will determine how much we're portioning. And then when you're thinking about like a balanced intake, ideally it's going to look something like a quarter of the plate is starchy foods like your whole grains or potatoes or corn. A quarter of your plate is going to be your protein foods, whether that's animal proteins or more plant-based proteins. And then half of the plate is going to be colorful. Half of the plate is going to be vegetables or vegetables and fruit. Oftentimes with my patient population, because a lot of my patients have diabetes, we're putting the fruit away from the meal. We're putting it at the snack time because they already have a starch or a carb in the meal. So if you're managing blood sugar, maybe you put that fruit, at a snack and have half that plate be your non-starchy veggies. So you're basically like really high fiber veggies that have low carbohydrates. Eating out, we have a lot of portion distortion happening at restaurants or even takeout, because really like a lot of those meals are 2 to 3 servings from like a calorie sense, even though they're serving it on one platter or one plate. So a lot of times like, you could split it or you could take half home or maybe order a smaller size, like the appetizer size, or if they have a senior menu, maybe a senior size. Sometimes it's helpful to portion control your snacks as well, especially like, things like, that are a little more high calorie or things that you want to just be grab and go, right? Like you want to just be able to grab a container or grab a snack baggie and throw it in a purse. That's partly why some of these processed foods, are so easy is that they're convenient, right? They're in a package already, they're shelf stable. You can just like grab one thing and it's already packaged for you in that portion. So you can do that with real food though. You can, grab a string cheese and an apple, for example. Maybe you need like a little cooler or some way to keep it cold during the day. But there's lots of snack options. In fact, maybe I'll send you a snack list as part of this that are quick grab and go. And then make the food that you want to be having more of visual, like in the pantry, in the fridge, in the freezer. In the fridge, if you can even like take time to prep, cut it up, put it in clear containers so you can see it. We're very visual eaters, so that can be helpful. And then it even just reminds you to eat the carrot sticks and the hummus or whatever it is. Fruit on the counter. What is on your grocery list? If you don't have any fruits and vegetables on your grocery list, are they going to get in your cart? And if they're not in the cart, are they going to get on your plate? Like, right? Like, so think about when you're planning ahead, which is half the battle, do you have enough of the things that are really nutritious, are going to make you feel full, are going to support your health, not just weight, but like health, right? And basically, what those things are. They're the things that we really need to be focusing on increasing rather than decreasing. And I will tell you that when a lot of my patients come in to talk about weight management, they're surprised that we end up talking about what is missing nutritionally, like what do you need more of? And that really helps with the cravings. It really helps with filling the gaps micronutrient wise, so they're getting enough vitamins and minerals so they actually can support good metabolism. Because so often people come in having cut to the point where their calories are so low, they're literally not getting enough nutrition to support good metabolism. And then when we put foods back in and their calories are actually a little higher, but they're getting better nutrients, all of a sudden they can start losing the excess weight. So it's not, again, it's not just about calories in, calories out. It's like, what is the quality of the food, right? And most people need more of these things: fruits, vegetables, beans and lentils, nuts and seeds, whole grain options, protein at breakfast. If I could sing like a hallelujah chorus for protein at breakfast, that is what I would do. Please have protein at breakfast. It's going to help your whole day. It's going to stop that muscle loss. It's going to jumpstart your metabolism. You're not going to be so hungry later in the afternoon and evening. And most people are missing protein at breakfast. Whole food snacks, more home cooked meals, plant focused meals, lots of color to feed your microbiome and to get all of those different like antioxidants, more variety, more water. You know, most of us kind of know what needs to happen, but you got to figure out like how. How are you going to do it? Okay, one last pitfall, good and bad mentality. Try to stay out of the um, thought pattern of thinking in terms of good or bad with food, because it actually ends up backfiring. And we see that there's this like brain response when we go and have the food that we've labeled as bad and we're, being little rebels. We actually get a bigger dopamine hit. So ideally, like the food would just be neutral so that you can make a really neutral decision about it. And my patients talk to me about this all the time, like, oh yeah, I labeled, whatever it is, the ice cream or the Cheetos or the Oreos as like, I can't have that. So then like that's the only thing they want, right? So just, get out of that good or bad talk, that language in your head, partly because when we talk about that in regards to food, we end up putting that on ourselves, right? Like we end up talking about ourselves that way. Even if it's not out loud, it's like internal, like, oh, I have been bad because I ate this bad thing, right? So we just want to not have any guilt and shame associated with this and really focus on how to positively support you in making changes. Yeah, and then oftentimes I see like this rebound effect happening, like they've been depriving so much on that particular food that then when they have it, they kind of overdo it on that food. So yeah, just put everything on the table and then ideally try and make a more neutral decision. Challenge the food police, whether that's somebody else in your life or whether that's your own internal language. And the permission paradox is like once you put all those foods back in, food has less power. And so there's, reduced deprivation, reduced guilt, more neutrality in making a decision about what you really want. Now, I will say we don't have a lot of time to go into it because we're almost at our hour, but I will say this is like coming out of like the intuitive eating side of things. So if this really resonates with you, maybe check out intuitive eating. There's a whole book on it, or multiple books at this point. And the permission paradox is one of those tenets of intuitive eating. However, there are some people who have more addictive like tendencies biologically who really can't put the Oreo in not because of restriction, like they haven't restricted the Oreo and then all of a sudden the Oreo has more power. They've never had the Oreo, but once they eat it, they're like, eat the whole sleeve. And it's not from a restriction sense. This intuitive eating is really getting over like diet mentality and developing a healthier relationship with food and body coming out of like the diet culture. But some people have never had a diet culture. Like they haven't ever dieted in their life, but they do have that addictive type tendency biologically. And we're seeing this playing out in the research more and more that there is a support for a certain percent of the population who really does have more addictive type responses to certain foods, specifically the ultra processed foods that have been scientifically formulated to trigger that in our brains, right? On purpose, salt, fat, and sugar, and palatability, ease of digestion. All of those things have been formulated on purpose by food companies to make us want to eat more. So don't be confused about that. Like it's a huge science. and they're trying to override our ability to say no, to stop. So if you're one of those people who just can't say no, then maybe it's better to not have it in your life. And that's a good thing to figure out with your dietitian and work through the pros and cons and like the nuances of that, of like intuitive eating versus like maybe more of that addiction like behavior. Okay, mindful eating. We're not gonna get into this too much, but just slow it down, right? Do your deep breathing, get into quote unquote rest and digest mode before eating, and check in with your fullness. Some things that you can do: surrounding yourself with positive people, have exercise buddies. Maybe you have some online or like tech motivators like a smartwatch. And then I would highly recommend professional intervention with a registered dietitian or an exercise physiologist, physical therapist, or a personal trainer. And then that psychology piece, whether that's a counselor or a psychiatrist or a psychologist. And bottom line, focus on the behaviors you can control. Weight is not a behavior. Weight is actually an outcome, right? So do you control that number on the scale? No, you control what you do or don't do. And so I would focus your energy and your resource like on things you can control. So specific behaviors, things like the amount of activity, the type of food, the amount of food, and the timing of food. Addressing any sleep disturbances. A lot of my patients have sleep apnea that has been either, undiagnosed, and then we get them to a sleep specialist, or undertreated because they think, oh, I don't want to wear a CPAP. But it's a huge, huge piece of the puzzle for hormone balance. And that can be the thing that actually makes a really big difference in being able to lose weight, is addressing like sleep apnea. Managing your stress. That's a huge piece of the puzzle for some people. So focus on what you can control and start working on. And along with that, I would set some SMART goals. So activity, write down your big picture hope for weight outcome, right? So you probably have that number already written down. But remember, that's an outcome. That's not a goal. Your goals are the things that you're actually going to do that are behaviors you can control. And ideally, you would make them very specific, measurable, actually attainable, relevant to your big picture goal, and time-based, like have a deadline. But even if you have a SMART goal, even if you make that very specific and measurable and realistic, oftentimes there are steps that need to be taken to even get to starting that goal. Like if your goal is to eat, 2 cups of vegetables every day, well, they don't just magically appear on your plate, right? Like they've got to get on the grocery list, and maybe you even need to brainstorm a meal plan to put them in the first place. Then you've got to buy them. Then you've got to wash them and chop them and have them ready to go. Then you've got to cook them. Then you've got to, make them taste good and then eat them. So oftentimes, like with these goals, there are multiple steps that happen to get to the goal. So you might have to back up and actually make an action plan of how are you going to implement the goal in the first place. And then I would set some milestones along the way, like, maybe chunk up your goals into smaller pieces, especially like outcomes, especially that weight goal should be like chunked up into small pieces. But even like a goal, like the vegetable goal, maybe you just start with half a cup and then you work your way up to a cup. Or maybe you start with like developing like one recipe a week. If you're not eating vegetables at all right now, maybe you plan one meal a week that has half of that plate as vegetables. You got to start somewhere, right? And it's easier for our brains and get that positive feedback when we set the those kind of check-ins or like the milestones small enough so that we're actually able to adjust those behaviors over time. There's a question in the Q&A: what tests can be done to measure the level of good stomach bugs? I'm assuming you're meaning gastrointestinal bugs, because you shouldn't have very many bugs in your stomach, because it should be a pretty high acidic environment, and not a lot of things should be able to survive in your stomach if you have good stomach acid. However, in your GI tract, particularly your large intestine, so your colon, you should have a variety of microbes, and that includes things like bacteria, yeast, fungi, and so variety, and there are particular strains that are associated with health, and there are particular strains that are associated with pathology or disease, right? And so there are some stool tests out on the market that will look for this. A lot of times you would be getting those with like a naturopath to look at a full picture of your microbiome. I will say like the research is on this, and like the testing methods are getting, much better than they used to be. We don't have any guidelines on this right now because we don't have any definitive answers on like what to do with it. But I will tell you, like, I've been able to use some stool analysis in the past to like identify particular strains that were either high or low. And then there are some, techniques for addressing that, either with probiotics or prebiotics, or particular herbs or supplements, in order to like hopefully increase the good guys and decrease the bad guys. And then, of course, I see some specific, gut diseases. Like I see bacterial overgrowth, both, SIBO and EMO, so small intestine bacterial overgrowth and intestinal methanogen overgrowth, which is a whole other thing. And so sometimes people truly have like actual adjustments in their microbiome where they've got too much of the bad guys and sometimes in the wrong place. And for that, there are tests like breath tests that can identify that. But if you think something's going on with your GI, then it's a good idea to check in with your primary care doc first, probably get a referral to a gastroenterologist to rule out anything major. Like they'll do a colonoscopy and they'll, screen you for like, tumors and things like that. And then work with a GI dietitian who really knows what they're doing gut health wise, because it's a whole world unto itself. Like there is so much going on there. So yeah, all that to say, like work with somebody who's familiar with this. Are there any other questions? Okay. So thank you for being here, sticking out the whole hour. We do have other classes coming up with Stilly Valley Health Connections. We have a cooking demo coming up here in June if you're in the area and you want to join us for actually some food samples. It's on potluck crowd pleasers. So, sign up for that or future classes. Hopefully I'll see you guys in the future at some point. If there's no other questions, then thanks for being here and have a fantastic summer. And yeah, really good health and happiness to you. And hopefully some of these strategies you'll be able to implement for your own weight management and your own health. All right, take care. Bye-bye.